fish in the sea, running on swimming around the world for free. Maybe a knife in its place, sitting there resting, waiting to cut to the chase. Standing around, everyone's wasting time, waiting for their fair share. Staying on the ground, no one's going up because nobody cares. Maybe it's fair. Maybe a map of the moon, pointing out several seas. Fish will be swimming in soon. Maybe a hawk in the sky, hunting while flying, seeing the mouse that runs by. Looking around, everyone's talking something that isn't fair. Raising up the ground, no one can find it because it's apparently rare. Maybe it's fair. You'll find me in prayer for all of our brothers and sisters everywhere. We should all care for everyone you can help but see out there. Then we'd be fair. Once everyone starts to care, then we'd be fair.
Hey, if you guys don't know, she's pointing. I know she's pointing at. All right, that's Michaela. She points. All right. So JJ, if you guys don't know, JJ is our musical coordinator. Brings all of our musicians here, and he's got skills out the wazoo. So yeah, we love him very much. Yes. All right. So yeah, JJ, look at him. So humble, waddling away. Yeah. All right. So for our guest, our speaker today, Mr. Josh Stewart, he is going to be speaking, the title of his talk today is How to Win Every Argument, Understanding How to Change Hearts and Minds, which is a very provocative title. I'm very interested. I'm just reading straight out of the program here. It says, Josh will be sharing his experience from his activism in debates and teaching us how to have better conversations with those with whom we disagree. Josh is the activism director for the Kansas City Atheist Coalition, who have a table right over here. Some of our friends from Oasis, they are tabling, they got t-shirts, and they're taking sign-ups to join the organization. So go see them and say hello and get a t-shirt if you like. And so I got a little warning label from Josh. He said his warning label is always questions the nature of reality. We'll see if that's true. Please welcome Josh Stewart.
Howdy, friends. Hi. How's it going? Right.
Despite working in the coffee industry, I'm still not a morning person, even after like almost 10 years. So, yeah, so I'm just going to start into this. I don't have a lot of time. So. All right, so yeah, I'm the activism director for the Kansas City Atheist Coalition. It's a 501c3 nonprofit. Our mission is to advance atheism through activism, philanthropy, and by providing a community for those who don't believe in a higher power. I wasn't always an atheist, however. I actually grew up in a Christian home. My dad was the head elder or pastor in our local Christian community, and he and my mother raised me with conservative Christian values and ideas. Beyond basic Christian beliefs, I was taught that abortion was murder, that homosexuality was a sin, and that the theory of evolution was an elaborate conspiracy by secularists to justify all kinds of sexual immorality. Obviously, a lot has changed since that time. I no longer believe any of those things. I deconverted from my fundamentalist faith back in 2009 and have ever since sought out fundamentalists like my former self in order to persuade them in the same way that I was persuaded. Fortunately, through an organization like KCAC, my efforts can be supported, our missions are aligned. I will say that I don't have my heart really set on disproving the existence of God most of the time. I don't spend a lot of time on that, but I am very concerned about the harm that can come from fundamentalist beliefs. And I believe that through reason and argument that we can persuade people to release those beliefs and therefore make the world a better place. So in doing this activism thing for a while now, that is arguing and persuading people, trying to convince people that I am right, I feel like I've learned a few things about how to do that well, mostly through mistakes. And that's what I would like to share that, and I'd like to share that with you all today. A few caveats before I begin. I will be bringing up some hot button political issues. I will be discussing ethics and morality. But my goal is not to make value judgments and make statements about what is right and wrong on any political issue, but rather is to help you speak to people who have different views from yourself and to see what moral values you actually both share. So the second caveat is most of this in terms of strategy and how to change hearts and minds comes from my own experience. And I realize that there are others who have had different experiences from myself, and that I, as a straight white man, am treated differently in conversation than people of color or people belonging to gender or sexual minorities. And so I won't pretend that what I have to say here is a one-size-fits-all sort of methodology for how to go about creating change. But I still hope that there may be something that you can glean from my experience. All right, so you have to forgive the clickbait title a little bit, how to win every argument. The subtitle is really what's important here, how to change hearts and minds. Because I think we need to consider, talk about what we consider a win in this context, and think about what our victory conditions are. Because if our goal is to win a debate by having a perfect silver bullet argument and getting everyone on the internet to agree with us in the exact moment that we tell them they're wrong, that goal is impossible. I've tried, promise. However, that is why I added the subtitle about changing hearts and minds, because I believe that's what our goal should be. And it shouldn't be to have the perfect answer for every criticism or getting everyone to admit that they are wrong, but to get them from a place of dogmatic certainty to a place of doubt, and hopefully to a place of new understanding. And I believe that this is possible. It is possible to change people's hearts and minds by talking to them through dialogue. And here is proof. All right, this man here is a personal hero of mine. His name is Daryl Davis. Daryl Davis is a blues musician and activist. Among his many accomplishments, he has played backup for rock and roll legends like Chuck Berry and Jerry Lee Lewis. And many other musical acts. But in addition to being an exceptional musician, Daryl has done something extraordinary. Since 1983, he's been systematically spending time to talk and befriend members of the Ku Klux Klan, and has helped nearly 200 of them throw their hoods and hate away for good. It all started in 1983 when he was playing country western music in a bar in Maryland, and a patron came up to him and said it was the first time that he had, quote, heard a black man play as well as Jerry Lee Lewis. End quote. Daryl explained to the man, he said, Jerry Lee learned to play black blues and boogie-woogie piano players, and actually he's a friend of mine, but that's where he learned was from our culture. The white patron was skeptical of this, but ended up having a drink with Daryl and then admitted he was a member of the KKK. The two became friends, and eventually the man gave Daryl contact information for the KKK leaders in the area. A few years later, Davis decided to interview the Klan members and write a book on the subject. He said that he had a question he wanted to ask them from when he was younger, and that question was, "Why do you hate me even if you don't know me?" It's a powerful question, I think, to ask those people, something that probably never really encountered, right? And Daryl finds a way to start a conversation, and he challenges these overt white supremacists with practiced and patient questioning. And when asked for his strategy for success, Daryl said, establish dialogue. When two enemies are talking, they're not fighting. I think that's really powerful. So, yes, it is a myth that we can't change people's minds. The truth is, activism works. Daryl is a perfect case of that. And honestly, myself too. If people hadn't talked to me when I was younger and I was in church and actively countered my ideas over a long period of time, I wouldn't be in the position that I am today. I think I would be also very unhappy as a result too. So yeah, all right, I'm going to switch gears a little bit here to kind of what's happening in our culture and our political climate right now. If you've been paying attention to the news for the past few years, you will have noticed that our country is very divided on political and ideological grounds, and that divide has made dialogue very difficult. So this dialogue that Daryl wants us to participate in, it's really hard. Both sides don't even seem to want to speak to each other. They insulate themselves on social media, creating echo chambers for themselves by unfriending all who disagree with the way they think. Another hero of mine, Stephen Fry, has a quote about this. He says, "A grand canyon has opened up in our world. The fissure, the crack, grows wider every day. Neither on each side can hear a word that the other shrieks, nor do they want to. I think it's time for this toxic, binary, zero-sum madness to stop." Stephen Fry is a little dramatic, obviously. But I agree with him. I agree with Stephen. I think it does need to stop, and I think it does start with us, to be just like Daryl and to start dialogue. But I also think there's a reason as to why things are the way they are right now, and that if we knew what that was, we would better be able to handle the kind of conflict we're dealing with. And I think that the reason for that is best explained by taking a look into some social psychology. All right, so a social psychologist by the name of Jonathan Haidt, he's a professor at the University of New York. His academic specialization is in the psychology of morality and moral emotions. According to Jonathan Haidt and his team of social psychologists and researchers from around the world in many universities, the reason we are having trouble having dialogue is that we are trapped in a moral matrix, or trapped in a moral paradigm. And it is a way of seeing our political opposites as a caricature of what they really are. And then we stereotype our enemies as either being totally stupid or evil to their very core. So, for example, when conservatives try and explain why liberals support so many welfare programs in our country, they stereotype them as being ignorant idiots. When liberals see conservatives trying to cut the welfare programs, we see them as being totally evil. And we just scream at each other as a result. When Donald Trump got elected president, liberals would see conservatives as totally stupid when they would try to defend Donald Trump's claims and policies, they would see them as totally evil. It's very much like we put people in one of those two categories. Now, Haidt is proposing that paradigm is wrong, and that he has proffered something called moral foundations theory that actually paints a very different picture of reality than this moral matrix that we find ourselves in. And this is it. All right. Everybody read that okay? No? I'm sorry. The actual images that go along with his study are, oh, thanks, friends. We can go down the list, but yeah. The actual images are under a paywall. You have to actually go to the site and pay for the study, or have academic credentials to access it. So I didn't get his visuals necessarily, but I did find some ones that are accurate, just not formatted correctly. Anyway, so in brief, this moral foundations theory proposes that several innate and universally available psychological systems are the foundation of intuitive ethics. Each culture that constructs virtues, then constructs virtues, narratives, and institutions on top of these foundations, thereby creating the unique moralities that we see all around the world. There's 6 foundations here, and I'm going to kind of treat it as 6. Originally, currently one of these is under review. They're going to add it to it pretty soon, but it's currently under peer review at this moment in time. It's actually the last one on the list. So the first one is care and harm. This moral foundation, this intuition, is related to our long evolution as mammals with attachment systems and the ability to feel and dislike the pain of others, so like empathy. It underlies virtues of kindness, gentleness, and the nurturing of children. This is a core moral foundation that we all share, liberals and conservatives alike. Number 2, fairness or cheating, reciprocity. This foundation is related to the evolutionary process of reciprocal altruism. It generates ideas of justice, rights, and reciprocity. Number 3, loyalty or betrayal. This foundation is related to our long history as tribal creatures, able to form different coalitions with each other to create teams. It underlies virtues of patriotism and self-sacrifice for the greater good of the group, for the greater good of the team. In fact, the kind of analogy that Jonathan gives for this is we do this naturally as human beings all the time, but we even do it for fun with sports teams and things like that. That's how deep this stuff actually goes for us. Number 4 is authority and subversion. This foundation was shaped by our long primate history of hierarchical social interactions. It underlies virtues of leadership and followership, including deference to legitimate authority and respect for traditions. So not just authority in society, of course that's where it's evolved to, but anytime someone says to respect elders or respect teachers or respect certain people for a status or a position that they have, or even who they are as a person. That is what that moral intuition is stemming from. And we share this with conservatives, we really do. Number 5 is sanctity or degradation. This foundation was shaped by the psychology of disgust and contaminations, the idea that things can be dirty. And it actually has probably helped us to survive. Us avoiding things that were dirty or unclean or doing things like ritualistic hand washing is kind of what helped us stay disease-free and clean. It underlies the widespread idea that the body is a temple which can be desecrated by immoral activities and contaminants, an idea not unique to religious traditions but is primarily contained in them. So, for example, while conservatives might experience this intuition more in terms of sexuality, liberals often experience it in relation to food. So being careful what we put in our bodies, eating organic, trying not to eat preservatives, and those kinds of things. That's how liberals kind of manifest that moral intuition. The 6th one is liberty or oppression, and this is a foundation about feeling of resistance and resentment people feel towards people who dominate them and restrict their liberty. Its intuitions are often in tension with the authority foundation. So it's interesting, I think, these moral intuitions, they're core to who we are as people. And this is what is the blueprint and the human mind for morality. But they're not always necessarily, they don't all make sense. Some of them actually contradict each other in certain ways, which is where we have a lot of our disagreements about. So just to recap, in order to change things like Daryl Davis did, we need to start dialogue. But starting dialogue is difficult because we are trapped in a moral matrix. That is, we only see each other as stupid or evil if we disagree. And instead we need to see each other as having all of these values and having these moral foundations. Just because we have the same values at our foundations, that doesn't mean there are not radical differences between liberals and conservatives. I don't need to tell you that, obviously. But what does that look like? Well, Haidt's research actually involves applying this theory to those differences to look more closely and get a better understanding. And here is what he has discovered. All right, so there on the left you have mapping of these different values. This was come up with by answering a lot of survey questions pertaining to each of these individual values. And the way conservatives actually answered the questions and the way the liberals actually answered the questions was very different. Liberals answered the questions primarily always picking 2 to 3 values, that is, harm and fairness. They championed those above all the rest. Freedom hasn't actually been added to this yet, but if it did, it would be up there, also on the liberal side. That's like liberal morality. It's like we care about freedom, care about harm reduction, and we care about fairness and reciprocity. Whereas conservatives, especially the farther to the right you go, they actually value all these 6 things very closely. I'm going to give an analogy here. So it's kind of like a mixing board. It's kind of how I want you to think of it. It's like there's 6 channels on the mixing board. And they've got, conservatives have all the channels kind of at the same volume, whereas liberals have 3 channels cranked all the way up. But they still have all the channels. They're still up a little bit on different issues. So you do still all have common ground. It's just the liberals emphasize one side versus another. The volume on each is, okay, I went off script, which I shouldn't have done. All right. So for an example, when they run a moral decision through this mixing board, liberals are much more likely to have the volume peaked on one of these 3 channels, whereas conservatives are more likely to pull from any given one or from multiples to make their moral decisions. Okay, I'm going to give some examples now. So, this pertinent issue of immigration, right? Conservatives are more likely to see this as upholding the laws of a country because they value authority. Authority is very much on that list for them. Whereas liberals are much more concerned about the harm that is happening to the families and those children. So you can kind of see the difference in where they emphasize things based on what they value. On the issue of gun control, liberals once again are concerned about harm that is happening with all the gun violence in this country, whereas conservatives are concerned with upholding the tradition of the Founding Fathers and what they set in place in the Second Amendment. But don't quickly just stereotype conservatives to only pulling off of one channel. They do care about harm as well. They care a lot. But they use the gun issue to talk about it from terms of, I need my gun to protect myself and protect my family from harm. Or we need guns in our country to protect ourselves from potential tyranny. We might need to start a revolution at some point. And so it's important to realize that they're not purely evil. They're just a little bit off on what they think will actually protect us and what will actually keep us safe. They do care about harm care as well. On the issue of abortion, we can see this playing out in just the names of the different sides and what they give themselves. Conservatives say they are pro-life. What moral value do you think that has to do with? Right, harm care. So they care about protecting life, they say. And what moral value do liberals, what are they concerned about when it comes to that issue? You can get it in the name, right? It's pro-choice. So that goes directly with liberty, actually. Yeah. I'm pointing it at the screen like you told me not to. Thank you. All right. So now we can see the difference. Now that we can see the differences in the settings on those fader switches, and how they can change depending on the issue at hand, what is actually fed through the mixing board. How do we go about changing their minds? I think you have to do 2 things, and this is kind of my overarching strategy right here, is connect with people on values. Speak to them about the ones they care about, assure them that you also share that same moral foundation, and find examples for them to connect with. But then, slowly, lower the volume on the fader switch in relation to that specific issue that you find troublesome. So the authority fader switch, if you have a problem with that, first connect with them and identify, hey, I know authority is important for our society to function, I care about law and order to an extent, and here's why, and get them to see that you also are not evil and stupid, that you actually are thinking about these things. Because they are seeing you in that light as well. So on immigration, from a liberal perspective, explain that you understand that having laws is important, speak to the value of authority, but that this law isn't needed or doesn't need to be as strict, or that it shouldn't be enforced. On the issue of abortion, speak to their value of harm and care. Connect and explain that you too care about children. You don't condone murder, but then explain that you don't think that this applies to this situation. Connect with them on the value of personal freedom. Try and show that you have common ground in regards to bodily autonomy. So I'm talking about, like, you wouldn't want someone to just be able to take your organs in order to save some other person, right? That would violate your bodily autonomy. That would violate your freedom. Get them to understand that connection with that moral value in relation to the abortion issue. I think I kind of use the term crowbar method a little bit with this, and it doesn't sound as harsh as it sounds, but it's basically like you have to speak to the value that they really are harping on, the one they really care about, the one that's just really nailed down. You have to get that hook underneath that nail, and then use the leverage of a different moral value to pull it out. And in doing so, you have to speak to their fears, you have to speak to their concerns, because otherwise, if you just ignore it, you're just talking past them. And you're operating in that false moral matrix. All right, so this is kind of like, at some point we stop connecting with values, right? The conversation switches to facts, and it can do this a lot in a single conversation. And when the argument switches to being about factual information, talk about those facts. Absolutely fight them on every single one you want to. Go absolute ham. Counter them when they have wrong information. Try and provide sources that you mutually trust in order to persuade them. This whole thing is a whole another Oasis talk about how to connect with them on mutually agreed upon sources of information. I won't do that right now, but in general, the guiding principle is don't pull from your pundits and don't pull from your media and expect that to just persuade people. That's just not going to work. In the same way, Fox News is not going to work on you, right? So find things you both can agree on are factual, and then and absolutely fight them on it. That's kind of my overarching strategy. I try to find common ground with values, fight with facts when it comes to having dialogue with people who disagree with me. But I also have a few tips for you to avoid problem areas while doing this, and I call these best practices. Let's see. All right. So number one is avoid getting into fights over definitions of specific words and phrases. If you can't agree on a definition, then just try and use different words to describe what you mean. Arguments over semantics are usually a giant waste of time. So as an example, I see this frequently in conversations between Christians and atheists online. Christians will say something like, "Oh, you have faith in science and philosophy, just like I have faith in God." And that triggers the atheist, right? They're like, "I'm very..." They'll be like, "No, I don't have faith. I'm not religious. Faith is something people have when they blindly believe something is true. And I don't blindly believe that science is true." And the Christian will respond and say, "No, faith isn't blind. Faith is yada yada, belief based on experience," or something like that. And they'll just be fighting about this meaninglessly. I see this back and forth go on infinitum, where both parties resist using each other's definitions and insist that their own be supplemented. And so the conversation bogs down and they don't actually get anywhere. So I think as a best practice, if you can't agree on a definition of a word, then just don't use that word. And just try to say it differently. If you can't agree on the word faith, then try a synonym like trust or justified belief. If you're having an argument about gun control, don't get bogged down in a fight over the definition of what an assault rifle is. Instead, find a way to describe what you were trying to say that doesn't have such a narrow focus. We've got bigger fish to fry than to just waste our time over hot-button phrases or argue about the definition of what the definition of a sandwich is. A little inside joke there. I think most of you are in on it, so it's okay. Anyway, so thanks, Berger. Number two, listen. Ask questions and then listen some more. Even the act of listening is persuasive. Listening is absolutely persuasive. I cannot stress this enough. If you take time and listen to people, they are much more likely to listen to you in return. And that's because reciprocation is an intuitive response rooted deep in our psyche. I mean, it actually is on the values, right? Reciprocity. And that it's so ingrained in us. It's actually used as a tool in like sales and fundraising to an unethical extent almost. I don't know if you've ever run into any of the Hare Krishnas or some folks on the plaza who they'll like have prayer beads or flowers or something, and they'll just be like, "Hi, do you want a free gift?" And you're like, "Well, I'm not going to say no to a free gift. Sure, like I'll be nice." And you take it, and they say, "Oh, would you like to make a donation to my temple?" And it's like they put you in that weird position of having to go against your moral intuition of reciprocity. You don't want to give the gift back, that feels wrong, but you definitely didn't want to give money, this feels like a trap. So, and it is. But they actually successfully raise a lot of funds with this tactic. And so I want you to use this tactic also, but in a little more ethical sense, I think. And that's that listen to people and then request that they listen to you in return. And feed off that reciprocity. Yes. So number 3 is be willing to concede every point that doesn't matter for the sake of an argument. Being willing to give ground will make your opponent much more likely to do the same. This kind of goes back to the whole thing about reciprocity, because if you show that you're willing to be flexible for the sake of an argument and to answer hypothetical questions, be like, maybe this is true. If this is true, then what is the consequences of that? How would I feel about that? How would I react to that? Go and explore all those things with those people. Get off the beaten path of like traditional partisan language, because then people start thinking for themselves when you do that. If you don't just use the company phrases over and over again, the tried and true stuff that they always know how to reject. Number 4, don't waste time. Be concise. Ignore new topics and stick to the subject at hand. This is kind of like not just one thing, but it's all based around time management. It's like your resources, your emotional energy, your time are all precious. Don't just waste them. And so if you're arguing with someone and they keep bringing up new points and they just want to like fight about the next thing, they don't want to actually dig deep into any specific issue, just ignore that. Stick to your topic that you want to talk about, the thing that you know best, and just keep on that beaten path. You'll find that if you stay focused, people will likely join you with that. You lead the conversation in that sense. And this also matters a lot online, because Facebook and social media are poor settings for complex written debates, right? Since it takes longer to rebut an argument or a claim than it does to actually make one. And of course, the longer you debate something, the bigger the thread will get. So just try and keep things focused on 1 or 2 issues, like maximum. Be concise in your replies, otherwise you risk losing people's attention. Last, ignore those who are not worth your time. This isn't as simple as it sounds, because a lot of the time, the person you're talking to isn't always your intended audience. This is very important. Remember that in an online setting, there are people reading your threads, and it's those people that you want to make sure that you speak to. And if someone is being wildly unreasonable or insulting with you in an argument, that doesn't mean they are a waste of time, because others are watching on the sidelines who could be persuaded by what you have to say and how you handle that situation. But if you come across somebody who's like, only writes long meandering responses, doesn't have fully formed ideas, or is honestly boring, move on. Like, that's not important. Also, along the same vein, it's common that if you engage with this kind of activism a lot, you will find yourself running out of time to make responses, right? You just kind of get overwhelmed. So I'm going to give you all a little trick of how to bow out of an online conversation, all right? And it's just this. So whenever you want to stop, say your last piece, and then just end your comment with, anyway, that's my take on the issue. I don't have time to continue this conversation further. I'll let you have the last word. Giving someone permission to have the last word makes you look generous and reasonable, number 1, but it's also a little bit of a power play, and so to the casual observer, it makes it look like you are the one in control or leading that conversation all along. And so I'm going to let you all have the last word. Q&A.
That's almost everyone. on social media for all of you people. No one needs to be told all their things. Okay. All right. So, also, the people who are trying to give you free gifts, they're not free. I one time had 3 colored pieces of string tied around my wrist in France outside of a church. It cost me 20 euros. So, be careful. Be careful. All right. So we're going to take some questions. I suspect there'll be a few. Raise your hand, and I'll try to get to you. All right. Here we go.
Okay, Josh, you went from one extreme to the other in less than 10 years.
Yeah.
In between that time, did you ever experience a point where you were just really raging against the other side, and how did you get away from that? Because that's where I am right now. I'm raging.
No, and the anger hasn't like gone away. I've certainly like channeled it to a certain degree, but I think like there's totally room for, if you're pissed and you just want to like let it fly. Like, I don't know, I used to visit for like 2 years after I deconverted. I would just go to church every Sunday and I would just wreck a Sunday school class. I would just and like boom, 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 whatever they're talking about, I had an answer for it. And like I just, monopolized the discussion hours long after the clock should have run out. And that was very good for me for healing, I think. And also, it's where I made a lot of mistakes and got like better at doing that kind of thing. So I don't think that's morally wrong. Sorry, to answer how did I get out of that, it just took time and practice.
Do you have any tips or tricks?
Just having an outlet, like being able to do it. Oh, yeah, and then also like, I call it work-life balance, right? It's like if you're arguing all the time or you're pissed off all the time, you just like are going to be a maniac, and it's like a spiral that you go down. And just like if you are to the point where you can't sleep and like you're upset arguing late at night, like no more arguments for a week or so. Yeah.
2 weeks.
Yeah, longer if you need it. Yeah. Self-care is important.
So Jonathan Haidt wrote a great book.
Mm-hmm.
Have you read it?
I actually have not read
Okay,
it.
well for everybody else, it's called
The Righteous Mind.
The Righteous Mind. Thank you, because I was not going to remember.
No,
It's very good.
I've
but
watched
it
all of his
touches on
talks and
all
read
of
his
this.
research, but I haven't read the book that he put out.
Yeah, it's very, very good. So my question about it is, and I kind of wrestled with this when I read the book as well, there's some topics of discussion, particularly with the religious right, that seem to be rooted in multiple things. So like you'll say that the abortion debate is about care and harm, and it may start that way, but then at the end of the day, it's really about authority, because it's about what God says, right?
I think it's about sex, actually.
Well, okay.
I think it's about purity, and it's very good.
Okay, right. So,
yeah.
But regardless of which one it is, if there's multiple values that, like, that's not a value that that's not a value that I have. So how can I, is that someone who's just quote unquote not worth the time of the argument when there's multiple values, one of which I don't share, because the root of it all is that authority that I don't have.
Yeah, it might be that you don't share a value at a certain level. I think for me, I'm kind of trying to purge myself of the purity value. I think that's probably BS as far as ethics is concerned. And I wouldn't share that with a Christian. And I certainly wouldn't share the idea that God is an authority with a Christian, right? But the whole idea of connecting with them with values is to get them to stop seeing you as evil and stupid. And if you can do that through at least discussion of those things, which I found that you can, then you don't have to agree on values exactly. You can just see that you value different things.
Hi, have you read any of the research on deliberately changing political views? For example, I read a study where a bunch of conservatives were hypnotized into believing that they were indestructible, and under those conditions, their political views actually liberalized.
Interesting.
Have you read any of that research?
No, I have not. That sounds very interesting.
I think I'm indestructible.
Guy, you are indestructible.
So Josh, for those of us who have to live in a little bubble just because of time and mental energy. Oh, sorry, I'm over here.
Oh, thank you. Where the voice is coming from?
It's good. No. That's hello. So for those of us who can't necessarily live on the internet or live in the world of politics and, you know, big thoughts, and we're like, what should we have for dinner? You know, like literally bringing it home, like whether we're talking with family or talking with our immediate family or friends or loved ones. How can we use some of these tactics that you've been teaching us today to talk about those domestics? Like, was it your turn to do the dishes or was it my turn to do the dishes? I was at work all day.
What was the last thing you just said?
Like just stupid stuff. Like, who does the dishes? Who does the chores? Who does the childcare? How can you bring it down to like a smaller level? I guess like more literally like close to home.
Okay, that's a great question. As far as like conflict resolution stuff, I mean, I think the whole like listening, asking follow-up questions, and listening. You could probably find a lot of that actually in best practices. You know, like you don't want to argue with someone over what the definition of having the dishwasher fully loaded or what doing the dishes consists of, you know. Like, you don't want to have that argument. Instead, you just say, look, I don't want to argue about what doing the dishes, like, you think that is. I just want these things done. Put it in different words. And, yeah, like, listen, ask questions, listen again. Be willing to, being willing to concede. Like, that's compromise, right? Like, compromise fits in with conflict resolution as well. So.
All right, this will be our last question over here.
I've recently come across the concept that all of us are still under the impression of several fictions, like government, money. These are all ephemeral concepts. And if we can come into understand them by going, you have an ephemeral concept which is false, but we also have these ephemeral concepts which are false, we could use that to understand one another. Do you have any opinion on that?
I think, if I know what you're talking about, like I use examples like the idea of sovereign currency and stuff like that. Like, what does money mean? Like, why does it have value? And those kinds of things to sometimes describe anything from like concepts about gender, concepts about morality and things like that. Like, what is real and that kind of stuff is very. It's very interesting and complicated, and pulling from other categories that are not directly related helps people understand what you're talking about. One I use a lot is the idea of mathematical realism. Like, is math something that we invented, or is math something that we discovered that like metaphysically exists, is real? And like, you think about that, and you're like, well, it doesn't really matter, does it? So it's like not antagonistic to talk about that kind of thing. It's not a hot button issue. So you can then relate it to other things.
All right, sit down, nerd. Round of applause for John Stewart. All right, great talk. All right, that was getting real heavy. That was great. A lot of things to talk about. This is gonna be a good lunch over at Crown Center. All right, are you going over there, Josh? Over to Crown Center for lunch?